really excited that, now we get the chance to meet some really awesome founders in the Earlywork community. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country and their continuing connection to land, borders, and community. Today, Jane and myself are hosting this Zoom call from the lands of peoples of the Kulin Nation and Eora Nation, respectively. We pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to the pivotal role that First Nations peoples continue to play in caring for country across Australia.
So now we're going to do a bit of housekeeping real quick. So we have 3 panelists today with us, Gabriel, Misha, and Alex. So the structure of tonight is that we've got a couple of parts. The first part is just a couple of questions that we'll get all the panelists to answer, and we'll take, ask each of you to take turns in just responding to those. The second part is that we've got one kind of special question for specific to each panelist as well, and as well as their kind of startup. And then final part, we'll close the question, we'll close it with one question for everyone to answer, and we'll also open the floor up to the audience. So Jono and Dan have kindly set up a Slido audience participation tool, which they've dropped in the comments, and they'll send kind of periodical reminders to make sure that people are sending those questions there as well. And then, we'll, at the end of the kind of structured session, we'll open up those questions, and we'll pick out any that, we've seen posted. So to kick it off straight away, could we get a quick intro of each of the panelists? That would be amazing. Maybe I will start with Alex, and then feel free to hand it over to the next panelist.
Hey everyone, my name's Alex. I'm a co-founder of Cecil. I'm actually sitting in a bit of an odd place at the moment. We're at our team retreat up in northern New South Wales. So very fortunate to be on some land that is really, a phenomenal piece of land that's going to be generated by some amazing farmers up here in northern New South Wales. I think it's important to mention that because that's a big part of what we do with our platform, is supporting the teams that are regenerating land across different ecosystems around the world. My background, I was a product manager in the Sydney ecosystem at a number of different startups in the food and beverage space. I then had the opportunity to work for Boston Consulting Group and Digital Ventures, where I continued to be a product manager, opened my eyes to a lot of different problems and challenges, 20 years and beyond. So met my co-founder there. We dedicated the rest of our careers to working on climate, and made the transition to starting a business just over 12 months ago, and the rest is sort of history around Cecil. Might hand over to Misha to go next.
Sweet. Thanks, Alex. Love to meet everyone on the call. Thanks for joining. My name is Misha. I'm one of the co-founders of Avarni and the chief of product. So really, right now, my role entails being in almost every part of the business, very client-facing, so speaking to many different clients on initial calls, and then taking that over to the engineering and design team and building out the product roadmap to make sure we stay ahead of their needs. My background has really been in software mainly. So I had a short time at Atlassian as an APM, but probably the more relevant background is I started an independent software business when I was in high school in the flight simulation space. And I grew that sort of independently, only a few contractors, but mostly myself. And, I've tried going and working for a couple of larger companies, and all of them have treated me really well, and I still wanted to go the startup route. And honestly, quite young at the moment, and there's probably no better time to take the risk than now. So yeah, I'll hand it over to Gabriel.
Thanks, Misha. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Gabriel Guedes. You can call me Gigi, and I always forget to rename myself on Zoom, so you can call me Gigi officially. I'm COO and CFO at Lyka. We are a pet wellness business that helps dogs live their best life through nutrition and preventive care. So we currently offer lightly cooked, healthy, human-grade meals to dogs, direct to consumer. And I'm responsible for the company's operations. We are fairly vertically integrated company, which means that we source most of our raw materials directly from the source, including some farms, do all the manufacturing and then the distribution. So I joke that we just don't own farms and we don't do deliveries. Everything in between is covered by Lyka. At least we don't do those two things today, perhaps in the future. Prior to Lyka, being a management consultant as well, similar to Alex, was at Penny Company, being there for about 10 years, working in operations. So been doing a lot of manufacturing and supply chain work. That sort of was a nice transition to use those skills at Lyka.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex, Misha, and Gigi for your introductions. And in terms of sustainability, it can sometimes be a very broad term. So I guess one of our first questions is, can you tell us, a bit more about your startup and how your startup's work fits into which area of sustainability it fits into? I'll put it to Gigi first if you want to, go first for this question.
I can take this one first. Well, we are a pet food business of pet wellness, but our main product is food, and pet food requires a lot of meat. Plus, we are as well a direct-to-consumer business, which means that we do have a footprint in terms of deliveries and packaging. So at surface level, I don't think any pet food company or retailer sees themselves as a sustainability business, but we do believe that's a very important part of what we do. Like as I posted before, we are a pet wellness business. Wellness obviously starts inside out from nutrition, but also goes to the environment. So if you're having say fires one year, floods in the next year, it's harder to have a wholesome wellness life. And same for your dogs, right? For your pets. So being a company that consumes so much resources, like by definition, like the food chain does consume a substantial amount, like 20% of total carbon emissions, for instance, and water we use it even more. We believe that we need to do our part to make this work. And by reshaping how the food supply chain works is a big impact in how the whole sustainability journey goes.
Awesome. Thank you.
So do I just throw the hot potato to the next one? So I'll let Misha go now.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thanks, Gigi. So Avarni works mainly in the carbon management space. So really one of the main problems that we found when we started speaking to different companies at the enterprise level last year was that so many of them have put in science-based targets to reduce their emissions over time because of pressure from investors and stakeholders, but really none of them have a plan for how to execute on those targets. And the reason for that is because so many of their emissions lie in their scope 3. So scope 3, what that means is essentially those are emissions that lie beyond your own operations. So there's sort of three scopes. There's your scope 1 and 2, which is your operational fuel usage, and then scope 2 is your electricity usage. Those are very easy to control and plan for how you're going to reduce them, but scope 3 is very difficult because you're required to work with partners such as people in your supply chain in order to do so. The problem is that it's very difficult to calculate those emissions, and not only is it difficult, but there just isn't that many people that really know how to do it yet. And so when we spoke to enterprises, what we realized was none of them are going to look for a technical solution or, a tech solution, more like, in order to solve this problem. They're going to turn to either hiring people internally that can help them solve the problem, or they're going to go to consultancies that can help them, because there's a lot of consultancies, especially, I mean, you'll see that there's so many consultants now that are opening up ESG arms to help companies with strategy in this space. And so then we instead focused on consultants and what their problems are. And their problems are that they have so much work that's coming in that they literally don't have the capacity to handle it. And the reason for that is because so much of the work involved in ESG and in carbon accounting is a manual process. So really what we specialize in is creating a tool that makes it easier to not only get a baseline, so essentially like get a health check, like what is my scope 3? What are my value chain emissions? What are they in the ballpark of? And where do they mostly lie? Because you can imagine if you've got a very large company and they've got tens of thousands of suppliers, it's going to be a very big job to try and figure out with all of them, what their emissions are and what their reduction strategies are. So we make it easier to focus on just the subset of suppliers that are the largest impact for you, and then actually engage with them to figure out a plan for their emissions reductions that are in line with your own. So yeah, I'll throw it over to Alex now. I think that sort of gives a good overview of where we sit. It's mainly in that emissions management space.
Great. So looking at from Cecil's perspective, just taking a step back and thinking about very much the climate problem that we're all facing at the moment. Effectively, in many ways, we have too many emissions in the atmosphere right now. We're continuing to send emissions up into the atmosphere. So a lot of the important work that teams like Avarni are doing, there's a really important role for measurement and reduction of emissions. And it's a complex space that needs a solution like Avarni for. But beyond that, because we've already done a pretty poor job of managing emissions over the past probably 100 years, we need removals as well. So what gets created to hit a net zero commitment is purchasing carbon credits. And one of the most cost-effective, accessible right now solutions for carbon removals and credits is nature. So this has created a significant, every net zero commitment you see an individual or corporate make increases the need for more removals and carbon credits. And that creates a supply-demand market. So the carbon market is demand from corporates, individuals making commitments, and then needing to access the supply of credits in the form of nature in many cases. There are other ways in which we can support. There are amazing technologies that are getting developed, but none are as cost-effective and accessible right now as nature. So for us, what we understood was there's a huge constraints on supply due to that significant demand that's coming around the world. We need to have more nature-based solutions and more nature removals accessible to everyone around the world. So when we looked closer at why that supply constraint existed, outside of that just being a significant amount of demand, it was wildly inefficient to set up and manage and create these credits on the supply side. So you have these actors that are landholders working with project developers who are looking to set up and manage these projects. Typically, what a project can look like within nature-based solutions is just think about nature being an amazing carbon sink. So you can sink carbon out of the atmosphere into soils, leaves on trees, mangroves, and different ecosystems. So we need to look at setting up these projects to enable nature to do its thing and to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So what we do is we work really closely with those teams because with more demand comes more requirements, becomes more sophistication. These are generating, the size of the carbon market on itself is $5 trillion, or it needs to get to $5 trillion. So there's a significant amount of financing coming into these projects. So through that, not only additional sophistication, you also need really strong data to base your claims on these credits. So we work really closely with those teams, and our software enables more carbon projects within nature, but also more sophistication around those projects to ensure that these markets can continue to grow over the next 10 to 20 years.
Really awesome. Thanks so much for that really, I guess, comprehensive, but also super concise, I guess, explanation of what each of your, startups do. I guess following on, that kind of response, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this. So given the scale of the kind of issues that each of your startups are related to and your mission, how do you measure your impact and how would you define success? Maybe I'll throw that to Misha to start off with.
Yeah, sure. So look, our measure of success is how many companies can we transition from not knowing not knowing what their plan is to hit their targets to knowing what their plan is to hit their targets. That's really the measure of success, because then you not only do their claims become more credible, but it also means that there's real carbon removed from the atmosphere. So, much of that includes how many of their suppliers can they get onto real and credible targets as well as plans as well. So it's not just one of the core pieces of a plan, especially in scope 3, is being able to engage with those suppliers and help them also transition to net zero. So the idea isn't that you as a company use Avarni, for example, to find out, okay, which suppliers are sustainable and which ones aren't. It's more about actually helping the ones that you're already partnered with also make that transition, because over time, that's also going to benefit them. They're, a large corporate client of a supplier isn't going to be the only client that's going to be looking for them to make these sort of changes. So really for us, it's how many organizations, not just direct clients of ours, but also their suppliers, can we get onto a credible plan to reduce their emissions measurably in line with their targets. I'll throw it over to Gigi.
Thanks, Misha. I think that's a very good question, Jen. And I think for us is to start thinking what's our ambition in terms of sustainability, or I guess in every single dimension, but sustainability, thinking what do we want to achieve with this process. And I think it's going to be a journey for us over time as we mature as a company, as the market matures, and the sort of society, I guess, matures their vision as well. I think at the moment, for us, first part is the wellness of the pets. Like again, if you have a pet that has, or as an individual, you're like diabetes, you're not eating very well, you're obese, or you have cancer, that's sort of obviously you cannot live a sustainable life. Therefore, for us, the biggest impact for the first one is the number of pets or dogs that are within our ecosystem that now are living a healthier life. The second element for us is the footprint we leave behind as we serve our first mission, right? At the moment, we're measuring these through 3 elements. One is animal welfare. And here what we do is we obviously these animals are going to be consumed through our process of cooking pet food, but we hope that they will live as close to their natural instincts as possible, have as better life as possible until they sort of meet their end. So we're trying to get we always get free range chickens, we'll get grass-fed beef, wild-caught fish, sustainably wild-caught kangaroos, and we do vet the sustainability credentials of all our suppliers. I like to the example, for instance, of our fish suppliers that they fish with target sonars, just find a school of fish, just scoop that fish that they identify and avoid bycatch, avoid damage to the sea floors. That is a source of carbon as well. So that's the one part of our what we leave behind. So try to minimize that. The second part is the carbon. We went through the process that Misha described, that very painstaking process internally of measuring everything that we emit to the point that we would say, or where are all our customers? How far does it take to drive from the warehouse to their last mile delivery? How much a truck is a refrigerated truck consumes per every kilometer driven? And bottom up really built the entire value chain, like scope 1 and 2, as Misha pointed, these are the easiest ones. Like the scope 1 is all within your 4 walls, let's say, of our production, so it's easier. Scope 2 pretty much comes in the energy bill already detailed there. Scope 3 is where the challenge is, because you need to identify every single item that you purchase from a contract from a supplier, and then estimate how much the footprint for that particular item. And that is on the details, because even if you say a kilo of meat, if it's a free range grass-fed beef produced in Australia, it's going to have a much different footprint than if it is, I'll say, grain-fed beef produced in the US and shipped all the way to Australia. So went for this process, mapped it all, and being able to measure it, that we track every month, compare the actuals versus the forecast, and the difference we offset it through a partnership. It's funny because I actually do the process that Avarni does, and I also consume the service that Cecil provides. So you can see the importance of those two startups. But we chose a project that a carbon offsetter that builds or does products in Australia, because we believe that if we're causing damage to the Australian ecosystem, we want to give back to the Australian ecosystem. And carbon credits, I know it's seen as a commodity, but probably Alex will be able to voice this over better, but there are different shades of green here in terms of quality of these carbon credits. So we want to tie back the carbon credits that we use to our mission. So carbon credits that expand natural habitats and environment, carbon credits that help the local fauna and flora. So if we have this attachment to animals, so if we plant trees on areas that will have wild animals be able to repopulate from ex-farmlands, old farmlands, for instance, that's fantastic. Then the third pillar of this, like what we leave behind theme, is plastic, which is now our current focus. So we're measuring now every plastic that we produce. Again, a painstaking process. Like we use only biodegradable plastics in our consumptions. Like for instance, with bin liners, gloves that you use in the kitchen, pallet wrap that we wrap our boxes. These are all biodegradable. We're working now with suppliers to get the last bits of packaging to be biodegradable as well. We're just finalizing this process now. But we receive a lot of plastic from our suppliers, right? Every single pallet that comes to my facility, unfortunately, comes with pallet wraps. So then we go unwrap all of them, weight it, see how much plastic is it, and plastic source by plastic source, and measure it all as well to have a baseline. And the same way we did carbon offsets for the carbon, we're now doing plastic offsets for plastic, which is a very new market compared to the carbon market. The carbon market exists for over 20 years. The plastic market is probably, I'd say, 2-3 years, at least the sort of certifications that exist out there. So we're working now through this process to understand what's the most credible projects and so on. And for every kilo of plastic that we generate or consume in Australia, we're collecting this from the oceans. So that's the short term. Our vision probably will continue extending in measuring the impact we have in other companies, because as we're a startup or a small company, we are just niche dealing with pet food, but why not be more ambitious and thinking, how can we affect the entire value chain of food in Australia, and then from food to other value chains going forward, right? So if I manage with the actions we take to influence our suppliers by either doing what Misha is suggesting, like asking them to really calculate their supply chain, just awareness brings action, but also to enable some things. For instance, if Lyka starts developing new types of thermoforming packaging for food that does not exist in Australia yet, because nobody brought it, and we are the first to pioneers use it, is usable, the company that brought it to us has now a valuable supply chain that they can go to other companies. And that will not only multiply our effect, but benefits everybody in the industry, because then scale brings lower prices, is lower prices for Lyka, is lower prices for other companies, and then it creates this momentum that the entire industry. So to your question, how I would like to measure this is, in the future, I would like to measure how many companies are using the plastic that we helped to bring to Australia, the bioplastic that we helped to bring to Australia, and then later how this will transform the entire food supply chain in Australia, and then hopefully goes that beyond in the other countries too. A long spiel, so I'll just pause here and hand over to Alex.
No, it's fascinating, Gigi. I think really excited to learn more about some of those plastic offsets as well. I think it's such a pioneering thing that you're doing. So it's great to hear the whole spiel. I guess for us, there's one simple metric that we look to scale by, which is hectares under management on our platform. So that's something that we measure ourselves by, because we know that if we've got those hectares under management across our portfolio of assets, then there's many different ways in we can produce, I guess, outcomes, as Gigi mentioned before, beyond just carbon. But what we have to be realistic about is, clearly we're not doing practices on a farm, so it's a little less direct. So we are a lot more ambitious with the amount of hectares under management that we need to have an impact on. So beyond just, it would probably be an amazing thing for one team to regenerate 1 million hectares. Like our scale that we need to get to as a platform is billions of hectares. We need to be supporting teams all around the world. So I think the scale at which we have an impact, we have a responsibility to impact a lot more organizations, a little less directly than participating some of those projects hand on hand. But if we can ensure and increase the quality across a significant amount of hectares around the world, then I think that's a huge amount of impact in bringing more projects online, but increasing that quality. And beyond just looking at the hectares under management, these carbon markets around sort of was at least our wedge into the ecosystem or the value chain. I think now what we see and what we're working really hard on is all of those other outcomes that can come from nature. So those can be other attributes around the ecosystems, biodiversity, water, or other attributes of what can make an ecosystem a lot more nature positive. And I think that you can look externally to that and think about ecotourism. You can look at the local communities who in the past haven't been as well respected for financing of regeneration. So I think there are a lot of different streams that can come off the back of the impact that we have. But we like to always, I think, stay grounded by the fact that we are a platform, a software and data management provider. So it's a little less direct, but I think we make up for that in the ambition of the amount of impact that we can have around the world. So yeah, that hopefully gives you a taste of how we measure it as an organization, but also increasingly, I think as you get further and further into the problem space, there are many opportunities to go beyond simply just looking at carbon being removed from the atmosphere.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing that. All the awesome successes and impact measurements that you guys are already doing in your work and with your startups and organizations. I guess reflecting on the other side of the founder journey, what were some unique challenges that you faced? I guess, on the other side, were there particular obstacles or hurdles? Unique challenges that, come with running a sustainability-driven startup. And I guess, Gigi, did you want to kick us off for that question?
Yeah, no, definitely can. I think because we are a startup that has a physical product, which means that our emissions are mostly on scope 3. To be fair, most startups will mostly scope 3, but we do have a deliverable product that gets to customers' hand that has a very impactful product that is meat. This means that a lot of the impact we can generate requires working with these organizations and sort of vetting them and sort of making some hard decisions sometimes, right? Like the way we designed Lyka from the beginning was to be more sustainable. So for instance, we use 90% plus of our ingredients come from Australia. So we avoid importing things that will have a massive footprint. We only import whenever like things cannot be done in Australia. Say for instance, turmeric, it's done in India, or we have coconut that comes from Indonesia. But we try to get as much as possible Australia. Obviously, this has a cost. This has other consequences. But we need to design, or we try to design a company like that, the same way that we decided to select our fish supplier, as I mentioned before, for a specific sustainability practice. So all those decisions have a cost impact, and we need to sort of be willing to invest on it. So it is a challenge competitor, for instance, or competitors that wouldn't do it. Also means that then the challenge is how to communicate this to our customers so that they really understand the value. And I'm like 100% sure that all of them are very supportive of what we do, and to an extent are willing to sort of invest as well together with us. I think the other element as well of a challenge for us is to reduce further footprint, because we don't want to just offset, like otherwise, to Alex's point, we need billions of hectares at some point. We need to just empty the cities to just have trees, right? So like offsets is something important that we need to do in the next 50 years. But beyond that, at some point it's impractical, right? So we need to also reduce our footprint. So getting to properly reduce our impact is means that we need to work with suppliers. So things like our plastic footprint, for instance, we need to reduce plastic that comes from in the meat that we receive. Like it's being like a very lengthy discussion that takes months and months, some cases years, and didn't happen yet. But they're every month grinding to tell them they're big suppliers, and then at some point, I'm hoping we're going to be big enough. But every month we hit the door, no, you're not big enough. Come back later, until eventually you're big enough that justifies, like they say, the Woolies and Colos of the world that can really dictate how they receive everything that they receive. So the challenge for us is always being talking and identifying who potentially can do it, work with them, get it done, a small victory, and keep building these victories over the years. Because for every victory you make, you can go back to the other suppliers later and say, oh, X, Y, and Z is doing it, why can't you do it? And then hopefully they will start listening and change over time. And that's why I said as well, our objectives will change as well as the whole discussion in society evolves as well. Because if every customer is pressuring them to do it, then eventually they'll end up doing, because that's what the expectations are, right? And we want to be on the forefront of this, but obviously we need to gather enough support, I guess, through for our customers, for society as a whole.
Awesome. Thank you, Gigi. Misha, did you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'd talk more on the probably founder's side of the journey. Really, probably one of the biggest challenges, especially working in this space, is just the fact that it's still it's only just ramping up. And so in terms of the market itself, there's not yet a very wide understanding of it from not just corporates, but also investors. And so telling the story and explaining why this is such an important space over the next 10, 20, 50 years, it's a sort of education process. It's not as easy as going to clients and saying to them, this is a problem that you're facing right now, and that there's all these other solutions in the market. Here's why we're better, or like here's how we're going to save more dollars for you versus this other solution. It's quite a bit more nuanced than that. And so the education piece, really getting people on board, has been a challenge to really get them to understand why there's a lot of companies that already do understand that they should be engaging in the space and that it's important. But the reason a lot of them are thinking that way is because, for example, their stakeholders have told them they need to care about it, or the investors have told them that they need to care about it. They don't necessarily know themselves why they need to care about it. So
those are my suppliers, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's probably one of the biggest challenges in the space, is getting everybody on board and sort of buy-in overall. And that translates over to, the challenges as a founding team. It's really when us as a founding team, the good thing is that we had a lot of the skills on the team itself to build up a very good value proposition by ourselves without investment. But finding investors in the space for startups that work in sustainability, finding somebody that's actually suitable, that understands why it's important, and that realizes the potential of the market as well, is challenging, because there's not that many yet. And what we will see happening over time is more and more people will realize that at the end of the day, sustainability, as much as altruistic as it is, but not just altruistic, but it's very important as well. It's an existential sort of issue that we need to solve. It's also a excellent investment opportunity. And so as more and more people realize that, we're going to see more and more resources flowing to the space. But anybody that's entering it right now is sort of a leader. It's a hard space to be in right now, because you really do need to have patience with people to teach them, to sort of educate them and teach them about why it's important to focus on the space, and also just paint the picture of why, beyond the fact that it's an important issue to focus on, it is also a very good opportunity to grasp in terms of investment, in terms of career as well, in terms of the growth that the market and the space is going to have, the amount of work. I mean, the amount of work that's going to have to be done to keep carbon below below sort of the limits that we need, and below those 1.5 degrees. You can read up on stats online. I mean, there's many organizations that have estimated it's going to take, our advisor told us this point, and I think Alex has probably heard this as well before, because we have the same advisor, but every part per million of carbon to reduce out of the atmosphere, we're at about 400 now, it has to get down to 290. Every single one of those is going to take $1 trillion of investment. So painting that picture is probably the biggest challenge right now. But the nice thing is that over time it's getting easier.
Thank you, Misha. And how about you, Alex? What sort of unique challenges have you faced at Cecil?
So I think just taking a step back, if you look at whether it's Gigi's business or Avarni with Misha, these are like complex, often systematic challenges. So you're not really coming in and doing anything aside from tearing apart the system and almost starting it all over again. So I think just inherently through the evidence you can see, through the complexity around how these businesses are going around approaching these problems, you are taking on a very large challenge by being in this space. Often I describe there's going to be a number of new categories that we don't know exist right now. So I think, to Misha's point as well, this is a very exciting. Am I still with you?
Okay. Your image froze. There we go.
Okay. Sorry, the dodgy northern rivers. Wi-Fi kicking in. So yeah, I think, as I said, like I think just inherently tackling these systemic problems is something that means you're coming into a very difficult space. But I think the opportunity is there's going to be a lot of new categories created, and there are going to be huge opportunities in returns on investment. But I do think that, yeah, there are challenges that come with the complexity. I think that there's a lot of investment going into climate tech at the moment, but there aren't that many funds that have done much more than just make an announcement that they're going to dedicate part of their funds to climate. And when you look at some of the funds that are out there who have raised money through LPs, and they've been through the journey of painting a vision for what that future is going to look like, I think those are going to be the pioneers within this space as view the future in the same way. So I think there are like funding challenges, but I think at the same time, there's massive opportunities, and we're seeing a lot of maturity around the market in that space. But just coming down maybe to focus on some of the challenges that we have. I mean, if you just think about the measurements, the verification, and the reporting that goes into these new markets, not only just carbon, but if we are to achieve that bigger vision within Cecil to be measuring and reporting and verifying biodiversity, that in itself is a phenomenal task for us to take on as an organization. So I think that we see a lot of complexities around essentially creating new markets. Again, rethinking what this system needs to look like and taking on the opportunity to create new categories and new markets is just as exciting as it is challenging. So yeah, I think you've probably heard that through some of the ways in which Gigi and Misha talk about their business, but that's shared on our side. So phenomenal challenge in front of us, but I couldn't be more excited on working on these challenges as opposed to some of the other industries that exist out there.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Alex. And just on that point of challenges for all our panelists, we have an awesome question from the audience that is sort of related to challenges, but more around the personal challenges that come with running a startup. So the question is, how do you manage mental health and burnout when climate news can be so negative and progress can be so slow? So yeah, like to open to the floor. Who wants to take that question?
Happy to start off. Probably because, yeah. I mean, it's definitely a challenge you need to deal with. It's not but it's not necessarily because of the bad climate news, right? The fact is that you know, if you just look at the media, it can be easy to feel like we're taking steps backwards, but you know, there's a leadership void in a lot of countries on this space when it comes to government, but there's a lot of private business that's stepping up and taking leadership instead, right? So I mean, you can see in Australia specifically some of the most high-profile cases of that are, for example, wealthy business owners such as Mike Cannon-Brookes making bids for AGL in order to transition it out of coal quicker. And you'll see a lot of those businesses, such as in Australia, Origin Energy, for example, they're moving forward with their shutting of coal plants. And the reason for that is not a lot of the times, you know, not because it's the right thing to do, but it's because it makes business sense. Because renewables are cheaper than ever now. And the only reason that really non-renewable energy in Australia is still affordable is because it's subsidized by taxpayer dollars. So if you look a bit further than the headlines and actually look at the space more closely, you'll see that it is going in the right direction. And so that's very empowering. And that's probably what gives, I mean, myself, but I'd also say Gigi and Alex a lot of confidence that being in the space is the right thing to do because it is moving in the right direction. And so that's not really, you know, when it comes to risk of burnout and mental health, it's not really that. It's just running any startup is can be draining, and you need to be able to manage your mental health, because it's very easy when you're working on a startup to overwork yourself and really not take the time to step back and just switch off. And especially I think in at least the generation that I'm in, and a lot of us are today, it's kind of romanticized the sort of hustle and the grind to always be working, and never, the more you work the better. I think I'm a strong believer I've been through burnout before, not just like in my previous business as well, and there's nothing less productive than burnout. So you need, beyond the news and the headlines and all that, you need to be able to take a step back and just completely switch off and not think about stuff, because that also gives you the opportunity to then step out of the day-to-day, and you might be able to see new opportunities so that, like, when you come back, you can pursue. So that's my thoughts on that. Happy to hand it over to Alex. You unmuted yourself just then.
Yeah, I think the question is a really important one, and it's almost a changing landscape, being a leader within an organization as well. I mean, as taking on a leadership role in our organization, I think there's considerations around COVID, which is part of our world now, which we wouldn't have expected, and the mental health impact of COVID, I think is something that's significant, and people are considering on a daily or weekly basis. So in similar light, I think the responsibility to consider how people are feeling about the climate crisis is just as important. So how do you bake that into your organization as a way of checking in on that? I think is important. And I think that as a value proposition for an org, it's not enough to offer someone a great technical experience and development of their skills, but you're also going to have to have a much higher purpose as an organization. And that should be connected to many different pieces of strategy, but I think that importantly, that will be connected to climate. And again, that's a reinforcing way of managing what can be really difficult for others, but also creating the right environment. So I think it becomes a core pillar of all organizations, and that openness to having that conversation, and it will go along.
Yeah, well, I think Misha and Alex covered quite well already. If anything, just briefly add is, I think we just need to be have the same traits that any founder needs to be. That is, really be optimistic, like really believe it can be done, and just every day get a little bit of it done, and celebrate the small results as they come through the journey. I do agree with Misha, though, that's pretty much the life of every startup, to be fair. I think we just add a little bit more, an extra layer of complexity in our case, in the case of a sustainability or mission-driven startups. But on the other hand, by being mission-driven, I think also adds a lot of energy to the process. Like if you're doing something that is, that's not only, well, you don't want to be successful just because you want to be successful, it's good for your startup, but because you want to do something that is better for the world. I think that does help the sort of mental health and the way you think that everything you're doing is worth it. And that same energy goes across the whole team, right? Everybody understands why we're doing this, and like together in the same boat to sort of make a difference.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we're coming up towards the end of the call now. And so to wrap up the kind of session, I'd kind of like to ask one thing that relates to hopefully people in this call as early career, I guess, members. What would be your one advice for young people out there who would like to start a career in and make an impact in the sustainability space? Maybe I'll throw it to Mish to start off with.
Look, I mean, the only advice I can really give, is there's no better time. If you're going to go into a startup or start your own startup, there's probably no better time to do it than like as young as possible. I think there's going to be a lot of people that'll argue, oh, maybe I'll go get some experience first at a large company. I think that, that has its value in some situations, but I don't think that should stop you. And I'm speaking purely from my own personal experience, right? So there's no knowing what other extra skills I might have had if I spent a little bit more time in corporate, but I just don't think anybody starting their careers should feel like they're obligated to, go and do work that they don't want to do, or that they don't feel like doing, and they're not 100% passionate about. It's, what I'm doing at the moment personally is a roller coaster, and emotionally, and in terms of stress, and in terms of also just excitement. Every day is a bit different, and so I believe that if you're going to, it might sound a bit cliche, but if you want to get into the space, just sort of dive in and start working on something, or expose yourself to as many opportunities as you can.
Amazing. Gabriel, Alex, would you agree? Would you disagree? Do you have other things that a young person might might need to know, in your opinion? Maybe I'll throw it to Gigi.
I can go if Alex. It's quite interesting because obviously I'm, I think probably not to the same career spot as most of you are, given that I've been in the market for probably almost 15 years now. But back in the day, I was once young, and I used to be. It's interesting because I was in high school, and that's when I started to get into this space, like 20 years ago. And for context, 20 years ago was like, I think the world was completely different in terms of visibility of this awareness of the problem, right? I agree with Misha that he mentioned before that actually there's a lot of bad news now, but that's actually because people are putting on the news. Before the bad news existed, just nobody cared about it, reporting it. So there is certain awareness that perhaps is what seems to be very bad, but is about to become better. But 20 years ago, I started researching more, and that's when I became a vegetarian, which I know it's ironic. I cook a lot of meat every week, but I'm vegetarian for almost 20 years now. And I think what I got from this experience is just by, even if I was not working directly on this space, I think I was always interested, researching, learning more, and took me perhaps much longer than one would think to actually jump more head first. And I had to be a consultant earlier, like getting myself the helping mining companies to be more efficient, for instance. That sort of a internal clash on how you think your world views versus what your job makes you like a sort of a demands from you. But being able to be always in touch, even if you're not ready to jump into a career now, being part of on your personal life, on your personal interests, perhaps volunteering in an organization or doing something on the side that keeps you engaged and learning, I think is a valuable step. And like, career is a long-winded path. 20 years later, we end up doing something that's more aligned to what I was thinking, perhaps too late theoretically compared to if I had started 20 years ago. But obviously, I feel much more prepared as well by having this background of understanding and even paying attention on the world and how it evolved over the period. So there's never too soon to start, as Misha said, but even if they start, it means just research a bit more. And by the way, that's what everybody in this call is doing, right? Just being mildly engaged. So I think that's probably a very good first step.
Amazing. So with Alex, I've got 1 more minute because I've got to close the meeting. But maybe it would be amazing to hear your advice in the maybe comment section of the sustainability channel. But what I wanted to say was, I'm sure that the rest of the participants agree that it's actually quite reassuring hearing Gigi, Misha, and Alex's response and the startups that you're founding and you found. It's really, really fantastic to hear that. To see that, really bright, insightful, and really conscientious folks working on some of the kind of biggest issues that are, affecting us and for generations to come, and that it's possible for young, careerists to make that impact. So thank you so much, Gigi, Misha, Alex, really wonderful insights today. I'd like to close the meeting. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Jono, Dan, Marina, for hosting this showcase. And yeah, have an amazing night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.